Field Marshal K.M. Karyappa, the words on the page tell us, was incandescent with rage. I make a fervent appeal to all my Muslim brothers and sisters in India to please come out in the open soon and declare, at least to their own conscience, whether their loyalty is to India or Pakistan, wrote Independent India's first army chief on the 15th of August 1964 in the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh journal, The Organizer. If to Pakistan, he wrote, they must pack up lock, stock and barrel from India and go back to Pakistan. The old Field Marshal's anger remains hard to understand. He had, after all, commanded Brigadier Muhammad Usman, who won the Mahavir Chakra for his role in the 1948 Battle of Jhangar. It was largely Muslim troops from the Rajput regiment that beat the Pakistan army at Poonch in 1965. Company Quartermaster Havildar Abdul Hamid won the Paramveer Chakra for his epic role in the Battle of Asan Uttar. Earlier this week, the Ministry of Defence spokesperson in Jammu deleted a tweet documenting an iftaar function organised by the Indian Army. The tweet was deleted after Hindu nationalist broadcaster Suresh Chavanke complained that, and I quote, this illness, presumably multiculturalism, has entered the Indian Army as well. The Army has, to its credit, continued its iftar programs, but without releasing images in public. There's been no official explanation of why the iftar tweet was deleted in the first place. Ever since its colonial era origins, the Indian Army has prided itself on respecting the varied cultural and religious traditions of its troops. Indeed, Indian Army officers are encouraged to adopt the practices of the troops under their command. The deleted tweets show how threatened those traditions are today. Field Marshal Karyappa's angry article points us to the deeper story of the tensions around military multiculturalism. Like India itself, the story of the Army's culture of tolerance is full of dirty family secrets, hatreds, resentments and prejudices that everyone knows about but are never allowed to be discussed in public. From the late 1980s, as arguments over religious identity sharpened in India's popular culture, communal issues also penetrated the army. Hanuman temples, sometimes built with government funds, assumed a greater role in the civic life of cantonment towns. In some cases, officers began to wear religious symbols such as vibhuti and tilak, even though rules barred the display of ostentatious religious symbols while wearing uniform. Large numbers of military vehicles began bearing religious iconography. Even as this reshaping of the military's cultural milieu unfolded, there were ugly debates. Permission for the construction of mosques in cantonments at Kanpur and Pune was denied, while another was demolished at Danapur in 2005 to make way for a stadium. These developments came amid an unfolding controversy over rules that forbade Muslim soldiers and Air Force personnel to grow beards, while Sikhs were exempt from this requirement. These tensions would explode in unprecedented ways when Navy Chief Vishnu Bhagwat was sacked in 1998, his detractors publicly claiming, among other things, that his wife was, quote, half Muslim. General B.C. Joshi, who served as the Chief of Army Staff until his death in 1994, exhorted his troops to the moral obligations, I quote, enshrined in the two Vedas, Rig Veda and Atharv Veda, scholar Omer Khalidi has recorded. In 2001, Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar announced that new cadets would be given copies of the Ramayana for classroom exercises. Religious education from the Quran and the Bible was also introduced. An Army Training Command Manual on Leadership published in 2006 generously quoted the Hindu religious leader Satya Sai Baba. And in a 2016 article published in the Center for Land Warfare Studies journal, Devesh Agnihotri made the case for the Ramayana, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita to be included in the officer training curriculum. Rama's campaign to liberate Sita, he argued, helped understand the ideas of planning and strategy since it involved, I quote, sending search parties, building overseas bridges, etc. Vedic leadership concepts and principles, Agnihotri concluded, have relevance in the Indian military leadership, wherein the study of Arthashastra and Mahabharata form part of the curriculum in the higher echelons training. Elements of the Indian army seemed inching towards the bizarre intellectual world that military dictator General Muhammad Zia-ul Haq created in Pakistan, a world where the clerics acquired the status of ideological commissars and entire books were authored seeking military inspiration from 7th century tribal wars. Like most stories, the history of bigotry in the Indian military doesn't have a neat beginning or end. It is possible that Field Marshal Cariappa internalized his attitudes in the colonial era army, where British suspicions towards Muslims, especially ethnic Pashtuns, ran deep. Even though there was precious little evidence to bear out the proposition, historian Philip Stigger has noted that Muslim soldiers were easily seduced by the idea of jihad. British army planners were constantly worried about the idea. In reality, the British Indian Army's Muslims had regularly fought other Muslims, and the idea that they might engage in a religion inspired war against the empire was unfounded. There is no doubt that partition, when units of both the new Indian and Pakistani armies disgraced themselves by massacring civilians, deepened these fissures. Even though ethnic Kashmiri volunteers had fought Pakistani insurgents in the war of 1947-48, circulars were issued banning the recruitment of Muslims into the army. In 1985, George Fernandez, who went on to be defense minister, bleakly noted, I quote, "The Muslim is not wanted in the armed forces because he is always suspect, whether we want to admit it or not. Most Indians," Fernandez wrote, "consider Muslims a fifth column for Pakistan. Estimates suggest that less than 2% of India's officer corps today is Muslim, numbers that ought to provoke some serious introspection." Deep-seated prejudice against Muslims, retired US Army Colonel David O. Smith recorded in a book documenting his experiences at India's military academies, is not unique to the Indian Armed Forces. He further wrote, it also pervades India's paramilitary and police forces, intelligence apparatus, and many parts of the federal and state government bureaucracies. Ever since 1998, efforts to tie the military with Hindu nationalist politics became more pronounced and explicit. 500 RSS workers were hosted by the 3rd Infantry Division in Leh for the Sindoor Darshan festival in the late 1990s, when the National Democratic Alliance was in power. Leading figures of the Hindutva movement, from the Shiv Sena's Bal Thackeray to the journalist Tarun Vijay, began to be invited to military events. The Vishwa Hindu Parishad was allowed to distribute denominational gifts to soldiers, like Rakhis. Following the Kargil War, when pictures of the 3 service chiefs began to be used in the BJP's election campaign, then Army Chief Ved Malik had drawn a Lakshman Rekha. The armed forces were anguished, he wrote, because they were getting sucked into electoral politics as a result of the blatant effort to politicize the war for immediate electoral benefit. Leave us alone, he told the politicians. The years, however, have seen an intensification of such practices. In 2016, the army sent the first of over 1,000 yoga instructors for training at Ramkishan Yadav or Ramdev's Yoga Center, a choice of obvious political significance given the religious leader's long history of support for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as well as his controversial anti-science postures. This is not politicization in the usual sense of the term, the military scholar Ali Ahmed has noted, but a convergence of institutional and political interests of the military leading to the displacing of government, just as happened in Pakistan. He further added, this is better described as the incidence of subjective civilian control, in which the civilian ruling dispensation connects with the military by ensuring that the military shares its worldview, in this case, Hindutva. For all the effort though, India's military hasn't degenerated into an ideological extension of the Hindu nationalist movement. Although bias and prejudice exist in the military just like they do in the society around it, the army has seen no internal conflict on communal lines. Even the kind of casual communal jokes and slurs that form a tragic part of India's everyday culture are severely discouraged. In spite of the ideological proclivities of individuals like Field Marshal Cariappa or others, the Indian military has successfully defended its multicultural heritage. It understands that intolerance threatens the foundations of a plurally cultural, diverse military. The deletion of the iftar tweet, though, is a warning that things might be set to change. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.